The 2022 International Conference on ADHD is next week, November 17th to the 19th in Dallas, also with virtual ticket options available. I'm going to be co-presenting with ADHD reWired coach Kat Hoyer. We're talking all about accountability. There is nothing like being with hundreds of people with ADHD all under the same roof. And I was able to get ADHD reWired listeners a 15% discount off the cost of registration. Go to ADHDrewired.com/ADHDCon 2022, but please make sure that all of those letters are lowercase. I'm still puzzled as to why that needs to be a thing, but it is. Or just Google ADHD Conference 2022 and use the promo code ADHD reWired ADHDCon 2022. All one word, ADHD reWired ADHDCon 2022 at checkout. And if you're driving and wondering how you're going to remember that, check the show notes for a link and for that promo code because we will put it there. If you are going to the conference, definitely be strange, but don't be a stranger. Come and say hi. Love to meet you. Hope to see you all in Texas. ADHD reWired, episode 454. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD reWired. We are doing our live Q&A here in ADHD Awareness Month. And let's introduce everyone here. Eric Tivers, host of ADHD reWired. We have to, at least to my left here on Zoom, we have MJ Siemens, the host of ADHD Diversified.
Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday.
Happy. We have Will Kerb, the host of Hacking Your ADHD.
Hey there, everyone. And as my dentist told me yesterday, I hope you have happiness oozing out of every one of your pores.
What?
Oozing is a funny word.
It was a very odd thing to hear from my dentist when they came in.
Yeah.
Because that's not usually your feeling when going to the dentist.
And we have Brendan Mahan, the host of ADHD Essentials.
Hi, everybody. I don't typically have happiness oozing out of all of my pores, but when I sweat at the dojo, I call it liquid chi. So there's that.
And to, no, it was funnier in my head. I was going to try to make a Tai Chi joke, like tie it together with chi. No, it didn't work when it came out of my mouth either. Next, we have Coach Kristen Martz, the future host of a almost to be named podcast. Hi, Kristen.
Hello. I'm still laughing from the first two. You could have used a tie-dye joke.
That would be colorful.
Yes.
By the way, Kristen, you should call your podcast ADHD Mart with Kristen Martz because that's easy to remember.
ADHD what?
Mart with Kristen Martz.
Why Mart?
Like a supermarket, like a PetSmart, like a place to go to get stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, it threw me off though, because it's going to be about art and creativity. And so I was going, why Mart? Why not art with Marts? You know, I was like,
that
what?
And we have Coach Kat Hoyer, also the host of a feature podcast, which we have named but has not been revealed yet.
This is true. We're keeping it under wraps, and go ahead. There's got to be something with wraps, right?
I feel it's so easy to keep under wraps that I forgot what we decided on. Do you still remember?
Nope, I forgot to.
And we have Lisa Ciesla, who's my executive assistant, community manager. How's it going, Lisa?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everybody.
All right. So we have our first question here from Brooke. So Brooke, what is your question? Let's just get you unmuted here.
My question is, what are your tips for taking yourself out of hyperfocus?
This is a good one. So I think it depends if it's a hyperfocus that is somewhat of a predictable type of hyperfocus versus one that is not. I know for things for myself, if I know I'm about to engage in something where I know I have a tendency to get into the hyperfocus, other than setting alarms to kind of snap me out of it, I will sometimes tell other people and ask them to check in if they don't hear from me, or I'll engineer urgency. So if I have to go pick up my son or something, like that's a helpful way for me to stop because I know that I need to pick him up. And also like making alarms not on your phone where you actually have to get up from where you are to go shut that alarm off can also be helpful. Kristen, what about you?
Well, I think this is more about a process that requires some longevity in its work, because I really feel like that self-awareness piece is huge, and learning about who you are. What's the difference between flow and hyperfocus? Having that sense of self-awareness and turning that on as you are doing work and creative things, browsing, shopping, leisurely things. I think the more we have a sense of self-awareness around it and a name for those different feelings, states of being, that is something that would be really useful in helping you not get so drawn into it also in the first place. So
awesome. Brendan.
I've found that if I work in a public place like a library or something, I get sucked less deep into hyperfocus because there's other people around, and that makes it easier for me to come out of it as opposed to if I'm at home where I'm more likely to get locked in tight.
And Will?
One idea is just drink a lot of water. You're going to have to get up and pee eventually. Getting up from what you're doing is a great way to break hyperfocus, because then you're like, oh, I'm not just sitting here, I'm doing something else.
That's a great one. There's also there are apps, like there's an app called Freaky Alarm or Wake and Shake, where you have to like shake the phone or like do something that mentally like forces you to get out of that sort of locked in state. And Will, I was listening to your podcast yesterday, your 3-year anniversary podcast, and you had there's a phrasing that you said about hyperfocus is you are borrowing EF from your future self. And that's, I think, one of the really important things for us to keep in mind is that hyperfocus is a really sharp double-edged sword, right? Like we are absolutely going to be draining our EF from our future self. So if you are a creative person, if like that's how you work, what's really important to do in how you set up your schedule is you got to schedule that time where you're not planning on actually being that productive, right? Which some people may be able to schedule that way. So, Brooke, I hope that is helpful for you. And I would invite people who are here live listening to also put your strategies in the chat as well. All right, let's go to another question. We got Deborah. Hi, Deborah.
Hi.
What is your question?
Well, lately I've been finding myself in like frozen mode. It's just like deer in the headlights, overwhelm. I know all the things I'm supposed to be doing. I set it up. I may not take the time to refer back to the Trello or all the lists, and I'm lists on lists on lists. And it's just like, oh my God. And I know how to prioritize intellectually, but I find myself just in overwhelm and then frozen.
Okay, so I'm want to ask you a couple questions because I'm kind of hearing two maybe separate issues. One is burnout. I find that when we are really avoiding the stuff that we need to be doing, and even the stuff that we actually want to be doing, but we're just having a hard time activating, I have to find that burnout can be a core piece of that. The other thing, though, you mentioned is that you'll make the list, but then you're not looking at the list, which I'm sure that probably almost everyone who is listening to this right now can relate to. All right. So the analogy that I like to give for this is, when we use our GPS app,
mm-hmm.
Would we program the address in our GPS app and then put our phone in the trunk?
Of course not.
Right. And yet we do this with our to-do list, which our to-do list is in a sense our GPS for the day,
mm-hmm.
right? Or the week. It's the thing that is guiding us for our next actions. So the two, and we talk about this in our coaching groups, the two most important things to have sort of right in front of you as far as on your list is what are you doing now what are you doing next?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And the reason I think the now and the next is so important is because we are not great at transitioning. That task switching or task shifting is, we know that our brains just don't do that real well,
Mm-hmm.
right? So by having that what's next insight in mind while you're working on something, it is priming the brain to help make that transition a bit smoother. So is there anything that you could do that could make looking at, I think you said you used Trello?
I stopped for a couple of years and I just resumed and I didn't even finish, but plugging list items that I have on so many notebooks, Post-its, everything. I mean, I have them all, piles of, then I look at it all and say, oh my God, and yet my days are filled with doing and sometimes moving the needle forward, but not necessarily.
Okay. How often would you say at the end of the day, you look back at the day and say, I did the things that I intended on doing?
I always do things that I intend on doing. It's just, do I do them to completion so that they're not there in the, running on to the next day? Frequently not, because frequently they're not things that can be done in a one day finite period of time. And that's, I think, where I kind of lose steam. I guess that's why people like cooking. There's a beginning, an end, and done.
When you're looking at your list, how many things are you looking at once?
Oh, God. 100.
Okay. Oh, so you're looking at 100 items and you're frozen and you're not quite sure why?
If I keep turning the page, some of those things have been on the list for years.
Okay. So I love this, by the way, because it's like what you're describing is such a common experience that so many of us have, right? So a couple things. Just because you added it to the list and it made it to the list does not give it rights to stay on the list, right? I think be very generous with what you add to your list. If you think of something you might want to do, add it to the list, but be even more generous with what you take off the list.
Mm-hmm.
If you have something that you have not done in years, chances are you're not going to do it. And because of our ADHD, we have CRS.
What's that?
Can't remember shit.
Oh,
right. And so the good news is if we are afraid, but if I take this thing off my list, then am I going to remember it? Well, if you haven't done it in years, it's okay if you forget because it's not going to happen, right? If it is that important, I think it will organically kind of resurface and come back up. One of the things when I'm overwhelmed with all the things on my list, I like to ask myself, if I could only get one thing done today, what would it be? Because we have all had those days where we had 5-10 things that we absolutely have to get done and we've gotten none of them done. So we've all had those days, right? So the question of if I could only get one thing done today is a great way to really kind of focus the mind. All right, because this is a realistic scenario. So what would the one thing that I get done today be? And trying to start there.
One thing is my memory is so bad, not short term, but long term. And I worry because I feel like, and I was just talking to my husband about this, you can't even jog my memory saying, don't you remember when? And I'm thinking, am I just so lost in the next thing and lost in my thoughts that I'm not living in the moment? Like, I don't know what's going on so I can't bring it back because I was never really there. I mean, I know that opens up a whole nother conversation. I don't know if that's something that other people have experienced or if that is an ADHD or I need to get myself checked out neurologically.
Whenever I hear people say, I'm worried I'm developing, Alzheimer's or something, like what the research shows, if you're actually worried about that, you don't have Alzheimer's. So if you are actually cognizantly aware of the fact that you're forgetting things, people with Alzheimer's aren't aware of that. So, things like stress, things like sleep, things like how's your self-care? Are you exercising? Right? Because if your mind is constantly like overfilled with all these things, our brain gets stressed out. I think one of the things that happens when we get frozen, our brain forces us to slow down. And so when we get stuck, I think that's sort of our subconscious way of our brain saying, slow down, you're doing too much, right? It just feels frustrating because we're trying to keep doing the stuff, but we can't seem to activate to do the stuff.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I love what you just said, Eric, because I think too often folks with ADHD are like, I'm not getting enough things done and I'm having trouble starting because I have ADHD. like maybe, but maybe there's something else going on there, right? Maybe you've been going too hard for too long and you finally hit the wall or something like that. So I definitely want to honor that because I know I've been there for like, I don't know, since the winter of last year or the spring of last year.
Brendan, it's because we're going through a pandemic.
I know. I was going there literally next, right? Like we're living through a global pandemic. It's a worldwide trauma event. That's hard, right? Guys, I went for 4 years posting a podcast every single week. And if you scroll back to March on my show, you will find that all of a sudden it's not consistent anymore. Suddenly it's roughly once a month. And then when you get to 3 weeks ago, it's back to being weekly because things calmed down for me, right? Like I don't go into details, but I'm not totally private about the fact that one of my kids is struggling. And it's totally, at least in part, COVID related. It's anxiety related. He's been struggling. He mattered more. So my priorities shifted, right? Now, I was absolutely like burnt out and overwhelmed too. But I want to critically talk about priorities and values and how we're allowed to have those, right? The stuff that we spend time on is the stuff that we're valuing. It's the stuff that we're prioritizing, regardless of what we think our values are, right? The time tells us that. So I would walk around and be like, yeah, I totally value and prioritize self-care and my health, except that's not true because I wouldn't have 40 pounds to lose on my little tiny 5'6" frame. If that were the case, it's 31 pounds now, by the way, because I'm down 9, because now I'm doing it right now. I'm prioritizing that. But I also had to get the space to be able to do that. I had to get the bandwidth to be able to do that. I had to move past some of the trauma that I was navigating from the worldwide pandemic and my kids' struggles. So when we struggle with starting, like you're burnt out, you're exhausted, you're allowed to be, pick 3 things, try to do those 3 things. If 3 is too many, pick 2. If 2 is too many, pick 1. And like, that's what you did today. And that's okay. For me, I have buckets. There's a self-care bucket. There's a family bucket. There's a ADHD business bucket. And I try to do 1 from each of those buckets every day. And that's enough. I usually do more at this point. Yeah. But was there a time when I wasn't even getting all the buckets? Absolutely. So just pick your buckets and like play along. And also action breeds action. So sometimes when you're like, I should do something, I'm not doing anything, I should do something. Just do something, anything. Go wash a fork. Like not even all the dishes, 1 fork and see what happens.
And don't wait until you feel motivated to do it. Like,
right.
That doesn't work. Do the smallest possible thing. The work then generates the motivation, right? Kristen.
I'm a big believer in playfulness and gaming, and now also defining what's going on. I work with children a lot in the clinical field. And so for overwhelm, I get the kids to identify what are those feelings that are crowding in on each other. So pause, identify that, because that helps kind of sort it back out, calm it back down. And then using the senses. What is something that activates your sense of maybe your inner child or your humor or your gaming in you? Maybe you're competitive, and using things like that out of the senses. Like I like photography and playing with photography. So I might take a picture of a cluttered up space, clean it, and take a picture of it clean and get to kind of enjoy playing with that and looking at that, or using music, or creating a scavenger game hunt for your tasks. That way you're giving yourself some fun, and it sounds weird fun, but it might help activate the other parts of the brain that might need to light up and sort of help with that motivation increasing.
Awesome. All right. Well, I hope that was a helpful response to that question. Let's do 1 more before we take a break. All right. We got Erica. Hi, Erica.
Hello.
What's your question?
I'm recently diagnosed and just kind of a lot of the coping mechanisms or the strategies that I've been doing pretty well. But the thing I'm really bad at is free food. I'm working from the office. If there is free food, I will eat it. I need to not do this anymore. Does anybody have any suggestions?
The struggle is real. Oh my goodness. Okay. Now are we talking baked goods?
Mostly, yeah.
Oh man, that's tough. That is tough. Okay. I love baked goods. My willpower around baked goods is so bad. Is there anyone in the office that you can maybe have as an accountability partner? Because I bet you that you are not the only person that is frustrated that there is all this junk food around.
I'll have to think about that. A lot of my coworkers also have ADHD. So yeah.
Okay. Lisa.
So I actually had the exact same struggle at my last job. So it was very hard to stay away from the treats and all the free things, but something that I would do, I would allow myself to have it, go into the kitchen break room, take my plate, go back to my desk, and then I would leave it there for like 5 minutes and really think about if I wanted it. And if I still wanted it, I would allow myself to have a couple bites, and then I usually wouldn't want it anymore. And then I would throw it out. And then you don't eat the rest of it. You've given yourself the satisfaction and you can just move on.
I'll try it. That does require some mindfulness and not automatic eating. My other thing with it is by mid-afternoon, I'm low on EFs. And sometimes I'm just frustrated, so I eat my feelings.
I'm wondering too, can you bring food that you're actually looking forward to as like a replacement, as a substitute?
I've been trying, but baking in general is not something I want to bring with me.
I saw a question in the chat that said, what are EFs? And such as ADHD Awareness Month, let's define that. EFs are executive functions. MJ, how about you?
So I want to point out something that you said, which was, I'm bad at free food. I wouldn't say you're bad at it. I'd say there's something that is there that's a temptation. I think a lot of us can relate to what you said about food can be a coping mechanism. And if it's there, well, my answer is why not? But also something what you also said was sort of the mindfulness part. Maybe a question that could be helpful is, and this could go for anything that does involve impulsivity, is what is the true cost of free? Because even if it's free, if we're thinking about it, if we keep taking the thing that is free, that is taking up space in our brain, or, if our future selves sometimes don't remember, what is the true cost of taking the bite of that thing that we don't really want, but we do want it, but we don't want it? It's just kind of how our brain works. So that's sort of my suggestion. If that's helpful, is, if that comes up at work, what is the true cost of free?
That's great. And, I don't know what the environment in your work is like, but maybe even having a conversation with, even with your boss potentially, where so what if like pastry days and, that was Fridays only, right? Like I would imagine that people want to have a healthy workplace environment. And while all the baked goods and free food like is fun in the moment, that's actually not going to lead to a healthier, environment at work. So that's, modifying and engineering our environment is one of the most important parts of ADHD management. So, and that includes with food, right? Like when it's the holidays and I get offered to take leftovers of baked goods home, I can't do it because it will be gone so fast. It's almost this like stress, like I just need to finish it or get rid of it because I'm just thinking about it all the time. So I totally get how hard that really is. And maybe gum too. I mean, finding a replacement, if there's something in your mouth, there's just one more barrier before you put that brownie in your mouth. So I don't know. But I think it's a challenge that I think a lot of us do experience. So I do appreciate the question, Erica. All right, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we have more questions. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from ARC. ARC is ADHD Rewired Coaching. We are already over halfway through our 30th season of coaching and accountability groups, which means our winter season, starting in January 2023, is just around the corner. Registration for our winter season of coaching and accountability groups is happening now. So go to coachingrewired.com to start your pre-registration process. Our next winter registration event is this Thursday, November 10th at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern. That website again is coachingrewired.com. In our award-winning coaching and accountability groups, we empower our members by creating a safe and supportive environment that's shame-free and judgment-free. And when you join our coaching groups, support continues beyond the 10-week program. We have a whole coaching community of alumni with coaching and peer support sessions every week. This is the ADHD community where we can all experiment with what works for us because we know there is no one-size-fits-all approach to our ADHD. Here, we can share our struggles and failures without judgment. And even when we stumble, this amazing community is there to help us get back up again. If this sounds like the community you need to start your new year, then join us for our upcoming registration event this Thursday, November 10th at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern by going to coachingrewired.com. Registration is by invitation only, so once you add your name to our winter interest list at coachingrewired.com, you'll receive instructions on what you'll need to do to complete before you receive your invitation. And once you do receive your invitation and complete your pre-registration process, don't forget to click RSVP so you don't miss out. Take the leap and kickstart the new year by building your ADHD toolbox and investing in you at coachingrewired.com. And if you are listening to this after that date, that website is still the same to go see where we're at with registration to find out when you can join our next coaching season. That's coachingrewired.com. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from Adult Study Hall at adultstudyhall.com, where you can get support for your toughest to-dos and not have to work alone again. Learn more and join the virtual body doubling community built for adults with ADHD by adults with ADHD. It would be kind of weird if it was built by kids with ADHD. Go to adultstudyhall.com to learn more and to sign up. It's only $19.99 a month and it's free for the first week to try. When you join us at adultstudyhall.com, your membership will include access to our weekly facilitated sessions, which we call Adult Study Hall Plus, to work on anything from job searching to decluttering, writing, creative work, and more. And if you prefer working at your own pace, then you'll have access to our 24/7 drop-in room, or ASH 24/7. That's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Access to Adult Study Hall is free for the first week to try, and it's only $19.99 a month after that. The doors are open at adultstudyhall.com. Come work with us. That's adultstudyhall.com.
And we're back.
All right, we have Farah with a question.
So the question I have is, how do you help someone who definitely needs help and support, but isn't ready or doesn't want it or feels that they don't need it, but at the same time constantly feeling overwhelmed and can't manage it?
Can I ask you what your relationship with this person is?
My daughter.
And how old is your daughter?
24.
Okay. So it's a tough situation because you can't help someone who doesn't want help. And the reason I ask you who the person is, because if it was a partner or a spouse, like now you're dealing with issues around boundaries and what you're willing to tolerate in a relationship, right? But if you're dealing with, your adult daughter, at her age, now keep in mind that with ADHD, still developing, the more you push, chances are the more you're going to push her away.
Okay.
Right? So I think it's really important that, especially when we're parenting our adult children or teens, you have to help them believe that you believe that they'll make the best choice for them. And that if they do something that, screws something up, that you believe in them to learn from that mistake. Like, you don't need to point it out to them. If they made a mistake, they know they made the mistake, right?
Yep.
So allowing the conversation or the topic to be open, but let your daughter drive the conversation. Because chances are the more you insist and push, the less open you'll probably be to that.
That's fair.
Kat?
I was just going to add modeling the behavior, knowing that, especially if, you have ADHD, then, knowing that you do things to help with your overwhelm, those types of things. I think that can always be helpful. So
I'm a mom who deals with this. I have a 26-year-old and have dealt with this all her young life. I agree with everything so far that has been said. And I would like to add, I'm sure you're being authentic and genuine because that's what we are as moms, in our own shoes, and stepping back for a moment and standing in their shoes to figure out, where they're coming from, or at least a guess of it. and knowing that you can't truly answer that question because nobody knows who we are without walking in our shoes.
Right.
So giving her the support, watching out for any empty promises, to not do that too quickly. And this is all, my trial and errors. And honestly, I would suggest doing some reading while you're in the background, ready for the moment that she comes to you and says, I need help with something. So reading things like Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. That is going to sound really strange when you pick it up, because it's a book about, coaching yourself and asking questions. But if I had been able to read that years ago and known about it, it helps you to figure out how you want to say what you want to say, but also learn at the same time with your child. There's something about how we speak, because words matter so much, that the words you say could mean one thing to you, but it's received in a different way. But as I've been learning more and more and more with all these different readings I'm doing around branching off into coaching from my deep and long learning in the clinical field, oh my gosh, I wish I'd had all these tools. It's getting better. So I feel you. I'm sending you love and hope and strength. And I know that she's very lucky to have you, for sure.
Thanks, Kristen. And I did read the book because Kat actually recommended it.
Nice.
I love it. And I'm very open about my ADHD. As I'm learning things, I bring it up and I mention that, it works for me, may not work for you, but just, I understand. I think it has to be time for her to accept that she needs that help, because she's usually very organized, so has not really experienced this feeling of overwhelm. This is the first time. And thank you.
Here's I think the part that sucks is it's kind of not your job anymore. So you can be a net to catch her when she falls, but you're not the ladder anymore. You don't bring her back up after she's fallen. You catch her, make sure she lands safely. You comfort, you help her get back up in the net. And then if she asks for a ladder, like, I got so many ladders, right? Like, that's totally fine. But she's got to ask. And it's not, the more you offer, the less she's going to want the ladder. And so here's what that boils down to.
Okay.
When she's struggling, validate that struggle, validate those emotions, validate what's going on. Don't offer help.
Okay.
Like, resist that urge to be like, I can solve all these problems if you just listen to me. Like, just validate. That's really hard. I understand it. And you might offer, like, if you need anything, let me know. But other than that, right? Because she already knows you want to help. She already knows you've got that stuff. Like, if enough time goes by, you can offer help again, because you don't want her to feel like mom's not willing to help me anymore. Like, play that by ear, Right. But stop offering so much help and just start offering validation in the same way that you would want from another adult, that you would want them to validate what's up. But when they start offering help, it kind of drives you bananas. It's kind of like the same thing, because she's an adult now.
Thank you. That is very helpful.
That's great. Thank you so much for the question.
Sure.
All right. We're going to take one more quick break. And when we come back, we'll have a couple more questions for you. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from you. Thank you to all of our listeners who tune in to the show every week. If you don't want to miss out on our weekly podcast episodes, then subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast player, or go to ADHDrewired.com/podcast, where you could also find our show notes and links to all the resources we mentioned in every episode. Next week, we'll be talking with Robin Buchanan about ADHD and minimalism. Is minimalism realistic with ADHD? Find out in next week's episode. If you love what you hear on this show every week, we'd really appreciate it if you left us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any podcast app that accepts reviews. Your reviews help get this show in front of more ears around the world, because even though ADHD Awareness Month is over, that doesn't mean ADHD awareness needs to stop there. And besides, I don't know about you, I'm aware of my ADHD every single day. ADHD Rewired is not alone. When you go to ADHDrewired.com/podcast network, you'll find the rest of our ADHD Rewired podcast family, including ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan, Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb, and ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens. And launching soon will be 2 more shows on the ADHD Rewired podcast network, so keep tuning in for announcements on those. Then you can join me and the rest of the ADHD Rewired team every second Tuesday of the month for our monthly live Q&A. If you were listening to this early enough on the day it came out, that means our next live Q&A is today. That's today at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 Eastern. Join us on Zoom by going to ADHDrewired.com/events. Find everything ADHD Rewired by going to ADHDrewired.com. That's ADHDrewired.com. And thanks for listening. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our Patreon community at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. A big thank you to David L., Matt M., and Ian B., who joined us this week on Patreon. Welcome to our community and thank you for your support. When you support us on Patreon at $5 a month or more, you can get ad-free episodes of this show. And at $25 a month, you can join me for a coaching call that happens every fourth Tuesday of the month. This means our next monthly coaching call is Tuesday, November 22nd at 3 p.m. Central. So mark your calendars if you're considering joining us at the $25 a month level or you are already a $25 a month supporter. And if you don't want to miss out on the tips and tricks that we share in our monthly coaching calls, patrons at $10 a month can get the recordings of our coaching calls every month. They're kind of like listening to a live Q&A where our patrons at the $25 a month level go through ADHD related topics like planning, working through to-do lists, creating action steps, and more. Podcasts are free to listen to, but they aren't free to produce. So we really appreciate all of our patrons that support us, especially now as we are getting ready to add 2 more podcasts, and that costs money for us as well. So if you love this show and want to support the work that we are doing, consider becoming a patron at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thank you. And we are back. So apparently the theme for this month's Q&A is food for thought. Last month, Will had shared that he was having some challenges getting his kids to eat certain kinds of chicken nuggets. They only wanted a certain brand. And you have an update for us.
Well, it wasn't that they would eat a certain brand. It's just we'd have chicken nuggets at home and then they wouldn't eat those ones. They're like, oh, I don't like these ones anymore. And we're like, it's frustrating because you're like, they're just chicken nuggets. So then we were like, okay, we're going to have a chicken nugget taste test. So we bought a bunch of different kinds of chicken nuggets at the store. I got like Impossible nuggets. I got some that were made with cauliflower. Just FYI, those did not win. Bunch of different brands. And then we had them do a blind taste test. They got to give them a score 1 to 5. The clear winner was the chicken nuggets we already had. They're like, these are the best by far. And I'm like, you wouldn't eat them last week, but you know what? Now we can go back to, hey, these are the chicken nuggets you like. And not only that, they loved it so much that they want to do it with other foods. Ooh. They're like, oh, can we do it with pizza? And then we're like, oh, we can do that with a bunch of neighborhood kids and that get like 10 pizzas and they can all try them.
Fun. I don't know when the next time I'm going to be up in Washington, but I would come up and join you for that.
Well, we don't have a lot of pizza option in Bonnie Lake, but
well, then come to Chicago. We'll do pizza here.
Yeah, I think you'd have a much better time with that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that update. That's so cool. All right. Do we have any other questions? So we got, let's do Phillips. Philip, what is your question?
Hey there. Thanks for this. I'm feeling, so I'm a 51-year-old. I didn't actually say my age. I suppose that comes into it. So I've been diagnosed sort of mid-year, midlife, I suppose. For me, my overwhelming things is I get a huge number of emails, and that is overwhelming. So I come back from my vacation after I've done the junk, it's still 2,000 emails. And so that I find really challenging to deal with. The other thing is going to the gym. Exercise is not my top thing, but I've had a couple of health scares and a couple of things where the feedback is always you need to get fitter, you need to push weights, and you need to lose a bit of weight. So, there's all of those things. So I'm trying to work out strategies to manage those sorts of things with grateful advice. Like for the gym, for example, because I can overthink things and then paralyze and do nothing. I went to try a class today because you can just turn up, do a class, you're told what to do, you don't have to think about it. So I'm just interested if other people have had strategies, if that works, if that's wise, if not, things like that. Thank you.
Well, as far as what's wise is trying stuff and figuring out what works and then doing that, right? Because, it's everyone's going to be different. So a lot of people do well with classes because there's that kind of accountability and that structure. Because if you belong to a gym that is open all day long, well, that's a lot of options for when you can go. Yeah. But if there's the structure of, here's this class, it's at 9:00, that's when I go, that's when you're going to go. Yeah. As far as exercise, it's actually really funny because right now, exercise is one of the most important things I do to manage my ADHD. And I have recently fallen out of my exercise routine due to my new current obsession. I achieved a bucket list item this last month and a half, and I now ride a motorcycle, which I love so much. And that has completely derailed my exercise routine because I'm literally riding every moment I have. So I'm thinking about this through the lens of dopamine. What is going to excite me enough to get the exercise when it's a competition in a sense between motorcycle, which is new and exhilarating and also very kind of meditative for me. I just love it. But I'm feeling the effects of not exercising. So I am going to be looking at re-signing up for my gym membership that I canceled during COVID because they also have indoor pickleball. And I love pickleball. So for me, I have to love it. But I also know that I also love how I feel even when I do, after finishing the workout, that wasn't that fun to begin with. I have an elliptical at home, which I don't love doing, but I feel good afterwards, right? So the one thing that I would say is that because we tend to, once we make up our mind that, all right, we're going to work out, we tend to overdo it when we start. So I want to encourage you to underdo it when you start. And then incrementally add a little bit of time or a little bit of effort or whatever it is you're doing. But I think it's really important that we don't make ourselves really, really sore when we start working out because your brain's going to remember that. And so let's say you do pick up the routine next time you fall out of it, because it will happen. I think subconsciously your brain's going to go, well, that hurts. Why do I want to get back into an exercise routine? Right. But if we can do it just a little bit at a time and just keep adding just a little bit so our body barely notices that we're stressing it, it's fairly easy to get into a good cardio space within about a month if you just add a couple minutes each time you go to the gym.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to cycle to work and I walk a lot. So I always manage to get at least 10,000 steps in a day.
Well, that's amazing.
So that's still not enough in terms of the health side of things. And particularly, what the docs are saying is I need at this stage to be pushing weight and doing those sorts of things. So it's, I had a few things, including a stroke when I was, in my late 40s. So there's stuff like that, and of course ADHD as well. Managing it is good to have exercise. So I do a baseline of that, but I'm not doing weight bearing exercises. That's the key thing they're saying.
What about hiring a personal trainer to work with you until you really build that routine?
Yeah, I did that during COVID because a really good price on it. So that was that worked out well, and that was good because you had that accountability. So the bit about doing something with someone definitely is helpful, and that's why I've been thinking about the classes as being an affordable thing where you're doing it with other people. In terms of just my working patterns and stuff, I don't seem to have the people who are around. On a Saturday morning, I go with a group. Other than that, during the week, there's not seemingly people who are around at the times that I'm around. So I'm conscious of that. Whereas the classes is one way of doing it. So that's why I've been thinking about classes, because you're around people and there's a sense of doing stuff with others, which is good.
Well, it sounds like you're on the right track, though. I mean, you're riding to work. You're doing 10,000 steps. What's great is that you are getting to add to a routine versus having to establish one out of thin air, right? Which is always easier to do, to sort of add something to what you're already doing.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Well, good luck.
And I appreciate this, by the way. It's really helpful. Thank you.
You bet. All right. Looks like we have Farah again.
Questions. How do you manage impulsive behaviors when you get to those bouts of, or things that you need to do and you really don't want to deal with it, instead impulsively do something else? And related to that, my other question was that when it comes to that, also the matter of budgeting. Because
let's do one at a time, because we all here have ADHD, and so we can only really hold on to one question at a time. Okay, so can you give us an example specifically as to where impulsivity is showing up for you?
Basically, spending the money buying it when you don't actually need it, or I already have too many things to do as is, and I need to focus on this. But somebody calls and we're going for, drink or something. Oh yeah, sure. Let's just drop everything and go do that.
Okay. So, and this is kind of a broad idea, but when you're dealing with impulsive component of ADHD, we want to create intentional barriers. When we're dealing with the inattentive components of ADHD, we want to decrease and tear down those barriers, right? So we want to make things either harder to do or easier to do, depending on kind of what the issue we're trying to actually address is. So when it comes to impulsive spending, especially if you're looking at online types of shopping, things like you don't have your credit cards saved in your carts, maybe take the apps that you do the shopping off your phone and only allow yourself to do it on your computer. I would maybe use the carts or your wish list. So like don't allow yourself to actually hit purchase until it's been 24 hours or 48 hours, right? Because there's plenty of things where I am like, yeah, I totally want this. I put it in the cart and then I just happen to get distracted and not finish the order. And then I look back at my cart. I'm like, why did I want this? So I just delete it, right? You also mentioned you have stuff you got to do. Then you get a call from a friend. They want to do something. And all of a sudden that thing you have to do is doesn't seem relevant anymore. So building that habit of before you ever say yes to anything, check your calendar. And if it's your friend and it's something that you're close with this friend, ask your friend, say, hey, if you ask me for plans, will you actually ask me to first check my calendar before I say yes? Do you think that's something you'd be able to do?
Yes, I have to remember to basically say I need to think about this.
Well, don't just think about having to remember. How are you going to get cued? So in the environment and in the place that you are most likely to have this type of scenario, what kind of cue can you keep in your environment? So it's easier for you to be reminded of it. And I've even been changing how I word this question. I try now not to say, how will you remember, but how will you be reminded?
Probably put the calendars everywhere so I can see it.
Okay.
And reminders to check things before committing to anything. I'm very visual, so seeing it is always a reminder.
MJ?
So I'm going to repeat a question that I asked earlier, but in a different way. I asked, what is the cost of free? So then the next question I want to ask is, what is the true cost of getting that thing? If we're talking about impulsive behaviors or shopping. So I'll echo kind of what Eric said also about putting up those barriers to make it more difficult to do online purchases. Again, if we're sort of sticking specific to the impulsive behavior of online shopping. A rule that I have for myself is that if I see something that is online that I can get locally, that I'm not allowed to get it online. I have to go pick up that thing. And sometimes leaving the house is a big enough barrier where I'm like, well, never mind. Or unless it's like an intentional planned trip to go get that thing, or if it's on the way to another place or thing that I've got to go do or get or whatever. For me, like I have to put those barriers up for myself because I need to have a tidy space, and the less things I have to organize, and that's also more brain space for me. Yeah, I'm great at being impulsive otherwise. But yeah, that kind of goes back to what Eric said earlier about, putting up those barriers. What kind of barriers can you put up for being able to pause mindfully, which that in itself is a practice, checking your calendar when people want to have plans to do something with you, or making a rule that if you see something online, but you can get it at a local shop. I'm personally under the belief that I still like to support people who are in retail because that is also a job. And I think that they still need those. It's a service. So that's just my 2 cents. I hope that's helpful. If anybody else has any like online shopping stuff, I hope that's helpful for you too, because the impulsivity is real. I get it.
No, that's really helpful. And I just know somebody had put in the chat that sometimes you say yes as a people pleasing. And I find that quite often as something that I say yes because of that, not necessarily. It's a combination. It's impulsiveness, but also people pleasing. So I need to work on recognizing that as well.
And we got to say yes to ourselves more, because when we say yes to others, we are then saying no to ourselves for something. So that's a big one that I know a lot of us in the ADHD community have been working on. Thank you so much for being here and for asking us questions. We have one more thing, and that's Will. Can you leave us with a moment of dad?
Why didn't the skeleton go to the dance?
Why?
Because he didn't have anybody to go with.
love that. That was great.
That's almost the same reason for why the skeleton didn't care about the Super Bowl, because he didn't have any skin in the game.
Oh my God.
Or why a skeleton can't play church music. No organs.
Wow.
Dude, I know I have a skeleton joke and I can't think of it right now. Okay. Well, it's not coming to me. So
is it hiding in the closet?
No bones about it.
So fast.
Oh my God.
I just made that up.
Starting is the hardest part, and then as soon as we start, ending is the hardest part. So let's end it on that, and we will see you back here next month. Thank you so much, everybody. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD reWired podcast network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD reWired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD reWired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD reWired podcast network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD reWired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great. starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD reWired, click the button to be a guest at the top of the page, and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.